I. I is for I. That is me, myself, and I. What can we trace the origin of sin and evil in the world back to? It is the I factor. I is a symbol of pride and self-centeredness, and Christians over the ages have understood from their reading of the Bible that pride is a grave sin which God hates. Understandably so, because even though many questions subsist about evil, we know it originated because the creation of God chose to rebel against God. Since love is the foundation of God's government and love is impossible without being able to freely choose to love or hate, there has always existed the possibility of God's intelligent creatures to choose either way. And unfortunately, we are told that a being in heaven created by God as Lucifer, by his own choice became the devil. The prophet Isaiah writes about this. He laments, "How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning. How you are cut down to the ground, you who weaken the nations. For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation on the farther sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the cloud. I will be like the Most High. Yet you shall be brought down to Sheol, to the lowest depths of the pit." We see a repetition of the word I playing out in this narration as emphasis on the origin of Lucifer's fall. He looked to himself and thought that he was qualified to actually be God, even though he was created by God, perhaps because of his beauty and perfection, as was hinted at by the prophet Ezekiel. So this creature, highly placed in God's kingdom as a high-ranking angel, a covering cherub, was created perfectly until mysteriously iniquity was found in him. This iniquity arose from his pride and his desire to be like God or even possibly be God. This is in contrast to Jesus, who made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bond servant and coming in the likeness of man by his own choice. Lucifer, on the other hand, by his own choice, became Satan after he rebelled against God. This rebellion was described as a war in heaven where the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, the serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Satan and the rebellious angels that were cast out with him are the source of the evil that pervades our world today. John continues to write, as received through vision, that woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time. So believers are admonished to be sober. Be vigilant, because your adversary the devil walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. That the devil's I thinking is responsible for evil in the world today does not excuse human free choice. Sin also came into the earth by an appeal to the I thinking in humans. Satan tempted God's first human creation by appealing to their I sense. He said to them, "If you eat the fruit, you will be as gods." So they also desired to attain a higher state. Satan deceived them to also want to be like the Most High, when God already told them that they had been made in his image. So the I factor, pride, continues to be the greatest sin and the origin of all evil. God says through the wise man, "Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. To fear the Lord is to hate evil. I hate pride and arrogance, evil behavior and perverse speech." The sin that tops the list of the two famed cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, that were destroyed by fire was pride. The prophet Ezekiel writes that they had pride, fullness of food, and abundance of idleness. They were proud, and this led them to focus on fulfilling the desires of I, the flesh, and disregarding God's laws. That is why the principles of God's kingdom, as summarized in the Decalogue, focuses away from I. The Apostle Paul, in his own I passage, highlights that the life in Christ is the antidote to falling into the sin of pride. He writes, "I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me." So Christians are admonished to have the mind of Christ, which is characterized by humility, that each person should not think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, as God has dealt to each one a measure of faith. It is natural to love oneself and care about oneself. In fact, that is why God said to love one's neighbor as oneself. But in order to live within God's will, a person must be careful to always imbibe humility so as not to be oblivious to the origin of all sins, pride. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and He will lift you up. I is for I.